All right, I got a lot of requests for it, so today I'm gonna be making a video on the naked chicken chalupa from Taco Bell. Now, honestly, I'd never had one of these before you guys asked for it, so I went out and bought it and tried it. And now for those who are living abroad and don't have access to Taco Bell or have never had one, this is a quote unquote taco, but instead of using a tortilla, the tortilla itself is just a chicken breast. Now, honestly, it was okay, but I think we can definitely improve it a little bit. And the version I ended up with was a tasty, juicy, and crispy kind of taco, chicken breast taco. Is it a sandwich? I don't know. So let's essentially make what amounts to a chicken sandwich sans the bun. However, doing so will give us a chance to experiment with some meat glue, and it's a lot less disgusting than that sounds, but I'll let you be the judge of that. All right, as I hinted at earlier, this taco is essentially just a giant chicken nugget. So today, let's make a giant chicken nugget. Now to do this, I'm gonna grind up about 500 grams or about a pound of boneless, skinless chicken thighs, which yielded about 6 chalupas in the end. Now really, I think that chicken thighs have a lot more flavor than the breast, which is why I'm using them. Taco Bell, I think, believe it or not, says they use the white meat, but you know, if you want to use the white meat, your results won't be too far off from what I got here. Now, I'm gonna grind mine up in a food processor. Now you could use a nice meat grinder if you have one, but for a recipe like this, you don't really need to. It can kind of come across as overkill. So I just kind of pulsed mine until I got a really fine meat paste, and the stuff I ended up with was more than adequate. Now while we're grinding, I'm just gonna go ahead and take this opportunity to season the chicken here. So I added about 3 grams of salt in with the ground chicken and just blended that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to use this opportunity to experiment with the substance affectionately called meat glue. Now this stuff is mostly comprised of trans-glutaminase. This stuff essentially binds proteins together to create a much more uniform texture, and just really kind of does act like a meat glue. Now, this stuff may sound scary, but if you've ever had imitation crab or even just a McDonald's chicken nugget, then you've definitely had this stuff before. Now, I really want to know how much of an effect this stuff had on the actual final product, so I'm going to split the batch of chicken in 2, one with the meat glue and one without. Now, if you don't want to or can't obtain the meat glue, I'll go ahead and kind of spoil the ending that not including the meat glue still produced a pretty awesome chalupa. Now, for the version that doesn't have meat glue, it's done. We can just set it off to the side for right now. But for the version that we want to add the trans-glutaminase to, just add what the instructions say, which for me was about 1% of the total weight of the meat, and we're gonna add about 4% of the total weight of the meat worth of water to that. We're gonna mix this together to make a slurry, and then add this slurry in with the ground meat. Now, when it comes time to form the ground meat, to do this, I recommend an old Chef John saying, which is wet hands make smooth balls. Or in other words, forming meat with wet hands will go a lot smoother than if you try to do it with dry hands. So here's me trying to form the patties with dry hands, and you can see how messy this is and how terrible it is. And now you can see me doing it with wet hands. So I really recommend having a bowl of water that you can just kind of dip your hands into in between forming patties. And we want to just form these into something thin like this. Now the naked chicken chalupa I tried was extremely thin, maybe only a few millimeters, but we can do a little bit better than that. So I was able to get 3 meat glue patties and 3 non-meat glue patties. Now don't fret too much about the roundness of the patties. It really didn't seem to make that big of a difference in the end, especially when it's folded. But for me, to try to keep track of this experiment of which patty was glue and which one wasn't, I just used a fork to mark the top of the non-gluey patties. Except for I made one mistake here, so just ignore this one that has like 1 or 2. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right, this one's glued. Stick these patties into the freezer and let them freeze for about an hour so that they become frozen solid. Now while this freezes, we can begin working on the special sauce they put on the chalupa, which is what they call an avocado ranch. Now for this, I'm gonna start by chopping off the top of 3 jalapenos. Go for 1 if you aren't really a huge spicy fan. And just toss this into the food processor. Next, I wanna cut off the top of a bunch of cilantro and then just toss that in too. And then next we want to add the juice from 2 limes as well as a whole avocado. Now lastly, we want to add in about 1.25 cups of some definitely homemade and not store-bought ranch. JK. You can see that I bought this from the store, and you're more than welcome to as well. However, if you do want to learn how to make your own ranch, check out my video on how to make ranch that I made about a month ago. All right, so just go ahead and blend this up until it's all nice and mixed up. I put mine into a squeeze bottle to help facilitate the prepping later down the road. And that's it for the secret sauce. Just place it in the fridge and we'll come back to it later. Now, while we're here, we should do some other prep, which is just to shred some cheddar cheese. You can also use Colby cheese if you want to. Collect that into a thing, set it into the fridge. We also want to dice up some tomatoes. I'm using Roma here, but feel free to just use whatever tickles your heart. And lastly, we need to chop up some lettuce. All right, so now the last thing we need to prepare before we begin frying is, maybe not surprisingly, the breading for the patties, which really is a lot easier than it sounds. Now, to be honest, the naked chicken chalupa I had was kind of bland. The breading wasn't super flavorful. So we're just gonna spice it up a little bit with our own little spice mixture. So I started with a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of onion powder, 2 teaspoons of chili powder, and one of those was of chipotle, but you know, that's between you and me. 1/2 teaspoon of cumin, 1/4 teaspoon of MSG, and lastly another 1/4 teaspoon of just regular salt. Mix this in with a cup of all-purpose flour, and that's it. So we also want to create a wet mixture to dip our patties into, which is honestly just 3 eggs that are just mixed really well and whisked till they're entirely broken up. So at this point, hopefully our patties are fully frozen through. You might want to just check on them, and if they are, we can go ahead and begin heating up our oil for frying. Now I'm going to be using a cast iron skillet because it makes it really easy for me to show what's going on, but honestly I recommend using something with a little bit higher sides, and that will just kind of avoid splattering and getting oil all over your walls, as you can see that I'm doing here. Yeah, and I can my deposit back here. All right, fill the oil up a few inches or centimeters with neutral oil, such as vegetable oil, and we want to heat this up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 176 degrees Celsius. Now, while the oil heats up, it's time to pull our rock hard chicken out of the freezer and begin the dipping process. So first, dip the chicken in the egg yolks and then transfer it into the flour mixture. And another Chef John tip, which is to use one hand for the wet and one hand for the dry, will keep your hands from getting coated themselves. However, I'm not that coordinated, so I always mix up my hands and get it all over my fingers. Once you have coated everything once, you can optionally coat again, and it's not necessary. And in fact, I didn't do this for the later stages. I think just one coating is fine. And actually, or towards the end of the frying process, I actually kind of perfected the breading game, and you can see here that tossing both the egg yolks and the breading side to side makes it a lot easier and a lot less messy. So that's just another piece of information for you if you're interested. So just as a note, I started with the non-meat gluified versions, and once coated and as long as the oil's up to temperature, go ahead and place it into the oil and let it fry. We're gonna wanna let these fry for about 3 minutes and give them a flip. Let them go for another 3 minutes or until the center of the chicken reaches about 165 or 74 degrees Celsius. Once the chicken is cooked, we can go ahead and pull it out and set it onto a paper towel lined tray. We want to just repeat this process for all the chicken. And if you're feeling bold / you have the room in your pan, feel free to do multiple of these at a time. Just keeping in mind that when you do that, the temperature of the oil will drop. So it kind of helps to stagger them a little bit so the temperature doesn't drop too quickly, too fast. And also just measuring the oil temperature throughout is not a bad thing to be doing. All right, so I just fried up all 6 of these bad boys, and that was that. So before they cool too much, it's time to assemble. Well, before we do though, what was the result of our experiment between the meat glued version and the non-meat glued version? Well, let's start with actually the meat glued version. So I went ahead and took a cut. As you can see at the cross section, it's an extremely uniform, almost like salami style piece of meat or something like that. It's really akin to the kind of chicken nugget you might find at Mickey D's. And it actually did affect the flavor a little bit. It kind of gave it a flavor that I associate with McDonald's chicken nuggets. It had a little bit more rubbery texture, and it was a little chewy, and it was kind of a little bit harder to pull apart. I did enjoy this one quite a bit, and if I was doing this again, I may opt to do the meat glued version. Let's compare this to the non-meat glued version. Now, as you can see, there is some separation within the chicken inside, but it's minimal, and the flavor and texture really kind of remind me of the oven chicken nuggets you can buy in the freezer section of the grocery store. Now, with that being said, either version will work, and both tasted pretty good. It's not making a huge difference in the taste department. However, if you're into experimenting with food, I do think this is kind of a fun little experiment to run yourself. Okay, so now that the experiment's over, let's go ahead and finish up our naked chicken chalupa. Just go ahead and start with 1 chicken breast and begin saucing it with our bold avocado ranch. Now you can see why the squirt bottle was so useful here. Next, we're gonna add some lettuce and some tomatoes and our shredded cheese, and we're gonna fold it up, and bam, that's it. So how was it? Actually, really tasty. Now, I really enjoyed the warm, spicy flavor of the chicken breading that we had outside of our chicken breasts. And the really fresh taste of the cilantro and the ranch really kind of cut through all of this like fried flavor of the fried chicken. It was really good. I actually had to kind of set this down or I was gonna eat the whole thing. And I'm also not gonna pretend that this isn't weird. However, I have definitely made weirder snacks in the middle of the night when I was hungry before, so I guess I shouldn't be casting stones in a glass house. Alright, well that's it for this week, and I will see you guys next week. One last thing is my friend from the channel Cooking with Q has released a new Gelato e-book, and he put a lot of work into this, and it's a pretty cool book. So if you've got $5 burning a hole in your pocket and you really want to read a nice well done book explaining the science behind cooking gelato with a bunch of really interesting recipes, be sure to check it out. I'll put a link in the description down below, and that's it. All right, see you guys next week. Bye.